Over on Jaguar Gatorade, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about a 1977 game between Michigan and Ohio State, and how no one got to see the first few minutes of the game due to a broadcasting controversy on ABC's part. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. When the starting quarterback gets injured and the backup has to come into the game, that's usually never a good sign. At that point, a head coach has to ask himself the all-important question. How much do you trust your backup to get the job done? How much do you trust in his ability to lead the team to victory and to lead the offense down the field on a regular and consistent basis? Do you carry on as though nothing changed and carry on as though it's business as usual? Or do you try and take the game out of his hands and just make it so that he can't lose you the game? Some coaches will choose the first option of playing to win, while some will choose the second option of playing not to lose. And it all depends on who your backup is, how good he is, and how experienced he is at running the offense in question. But most of the time, you don't hear about the third option, where you completely change up the game plan, but change it in a way to trust your backup even more than you trusted your starter. You decide to let the backup quarterback take complete control of everything. You decide that now that the backup is in the game, you're going to be extremely hands-off, and you're just going to let the backup do his thing and let it ride. Yet in 1985, that's exactly what New England Patriots head coach Raymond Berry did with the man you've been watching this whole time, the veteran quarterback, Steve Grogan. Because in a 1985 game between the New England Patriots and the Buffalo Bills, Coach Berry made a halftime adjustment so great that you might not know about, that may have single-handedly saved New England's season and kept their playoff hopes alive. Because this is the story behind the greatest halftime adjustment in the over 60-year history of the New England Patriots franchise. Before I talk about the actual halftime adjustment that was made that changed everything, we need some context to understand how the game was going, and the events that occurred prior to halftime that necessitated this crazy adjustment. It's October 13th, 1985. It's week 6 of the NFL season, and we have a big game on our hands over at Sullivan Stadium in the AFC East, between the New England Patriots and the Buffalo Bills. This feels like a big game and a must-win of sorts for the Pats, especially going up against a winless 0-5 Bills team. As things stood, the Patriots were struggling heavily, as after dropping 2 straight games, they found themselves sitting at 2-3 in the ultra-competitive AFC. You had 12 teams in the conference at this point with at least 2 wins, and they were all fighting for 5 spots in the playoffs. Granted, there was still a ton of time left, but it was very clear that there wasn't going to be a whole lot of room for error the rest of the way, especially since of the 10 teams to make the playoffs the previous year in 1984, not a single one of them was below 500 after 6 games. Especially considering the fact that the Patriots still had to play the 2 best teams in the AFC at the time, the 5-1 New York Jets and the reigning AFC champion 4-2 Miami Dolphins, 4 times down the stretch. If the Pats lost this game against the winless Bills to drop to 2-4, their season would be toast. This was a game that they could not afford to play poorly in. And sure enough, this game was looking like an absolute disaster for the Pats. Even though the Patriots entered this game as 10-point favorites, they certainly weren't playing like them, as when the halftime whistle hit, the Pats had scored a grand total of 0 points. To say that the offense got nothing going over the entire first half of the game would be a massive understatement, as on this wet day up in Foxborough, the slightly over 40,000 fans who attended this game and braved the conditions were not too pleased with their team's performance, as the sun wasn't the only thing that failed to show up. In the first half, the Pats mustered up just 113 yards of total offense and 5 first downs. That's it. And 56 of them came on a garbage time play with no time left in the first half, and the Bills in a prevent defense. So for all intents and purposes, They only had 57 yards and 4 first downs. I think you could tell what kind of a day it was going to be when on the second play from a scrimmage that the Pats had, Stanley Morgan, a franchise legend and one of the best receivers in team history, dropped this insanely easy, routine pass over the middle. And when you compound that with Tony Collins, a former Pro Bowl running back, fumbling the ball on literally the very next play, yeah, it was going to be a rough day at the office. But making matters even worse was the fact that during this first half, where the Patriots trailed 3-0, their starting quarterback, the 30-year man and former first-round pick, Tony Eason, went down. Eason was already having a shaky season so far. After a solid 1984 campaign, where he assumed the starting job for good over Steve Grogan, which we'll get to in a bit, Eason was struggling heavily through the first 5 games of 1985, having no games where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions, and throwing just 4 touchdowns and 9 picks to start the year off. And this game against Buffalo was more of the same to start off. Eason was just 8 for 16 with 65 yards passing, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, with one going to Derek Burrows and the other going to Charles Romes, and a passer rating of 21.1, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. He also took 3 sacks for a loss of 29 yards on back-to-back plays, meaning that Eason had just 36 net passing yards in that first half. However, it was on that final sack that he took, which set up an embarrassing 4th and 39, that was the killer. Because on that play, when Ben Williams and Bruce Smith took him to the ground, Eason injured his left shoulder. The diagnosis was a separated left shoulder, and he would have to leave the game and miss an extended period of time. Time for Steve Grogan to come in relief, which took Grogan himself by surprise. As Grogan said, when Tony got hurt and came out of the game, I went over to him to see how he was doing. He said he was okay, so I thought he was going to stay in the game. Then I saw all the doctors crowding around him, and I decided I better start warming up. There were just a few small problems with having Grogan come into the game. Number 1, Grogan was not exactly very good by this point, and was not a backup that a lot of people had a whole lot of confidence in. Sure, you could do worse than Grogan as your backup. You can do worse than the guy who previously led you to the playoffs a few times and led the league in passing touchdowns in 1979. However, you could do a whole lot better, especially since the previous year, in 1984, Grogan had just 3 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions, finishing with a passer rating of 46.4. For some perspective, there were 49 quarterbacks in football in 1984 to attempt as many passes as Grogan did, and of those 49, Grogan ranked 45th in passer rating, ranking 5th from the bottom. Number 2, Grogan was not exactly well prepared for this spot. By his own admission, he wasn't ready. He didn't take any reps during practice, and his knees were weak and his palms were sweaty when he had to go in, even saying afterwards that he was mad at himself for not being better prepared, adding, "I just didn't think I would play." Grogan even said that he asked his teammates for help in the huddle when he was brought on at the end of the first half. That's how badly he was struggling to get everything down. At number 3, Grogan was extremely rusty. The last time he played was in Week 3 of the 1984 season on September 16th, more than 13 months ago, when he started the game before getting yanked for Tony Eason after going 0 for 4 with an interception and 3 sacks. And if that rust wasn't apparent beforehand, it was apparent after his very first play, when he fumbled a routine snap and put the Bills in field goal range right away. So when halftime hit, and the Pats were down 3-0 with their very poor backup quarterback in the game, head coach Raymond Berry had to go back to the drawing board. If he didn't think of something, then not only would they lose this game and give Buffalo their first win of the season, but they would end any realistic shot they had themselves at making it to the postseason. Berry, knowing everything we know about Grogan, seemingly had two options. Trust him the same way you trusted Tony Eason and keep the game plan the same, or take the game out of his hands, play conservative, trust your defense to win the field position battle like they had so far, and only throw when absolutely necessary. At least, that's what most coaches would do in this situation. But not Raymond Berry. Oh no, not Raymond Berry. Because he had a third option up his sleeve that shocked the players and almost felt like it came straight out of a movie. Because in the second half, Berry decided that he wasn't going to call any of the plays. Instead, Grogan, the backup quarterback who wasn't prepared for this moment and hadn't appeared in a game in 13 months, was going to do so. Steve Grogan, this is your game now. You're in charge of everything. Yeah, no one saw that coming at all. Despite all of those aforementioned circumstances, you're going to give your backup even more control than you gave your starter? You're going to allow the guy that hadn't played in over a year and was incredibly rusty to run the offense call all of the plays? Again, no one saw this coming, especially Steve Grogan himself, who said on this, "It surprised me when Coach Berry walked in and said, 'Why don't you call it yourself?' I wasn't real solid about all the formations because I haven't had much practice." Still, Coach Berry insisted that this was New England's best chance at getting the offense moving in the right direction. The logic behind Berry's decision was simple. Because he hadn't played in a while, because he hadn't practiced in quite some time, and because he was a longtime veteran with the team, having been with the Pats since all the way back in 1975, let him call the plays that he's most comfortable with. There's no point in sending in plays and having him run plays that he doesn't know and hadn't practiced in quite some time. He'd either run those plays poorly, negatively impacting the offense, or he wouldn't be able to get the playoff in time because he would be rejecting all those plays and calling audibles, also negatively impacting the offense. Still, it took a lot of guts for Coach Berry to decide in the second half, with the offense struggling the way it had been, to be completely hands-off and let the backup who hadn't played in the last 18 games call all the shots. Which raises the question, how did this strategy work out? How did the Patriots play in the second half under this bold idea where the rusty backup takes complete control? Well, considering the fact that they drove 80 yards on the first drive of the third quarter and found the end zone after Grogan hit Irving Fryer on a 16-yard touchdown pass, I'd say they did pretty good. Because in the second half of this game, it was like the Patriots were on a completely different level. It was like they were a brand new team. They were playing like an offense that actually knew what they were doing. They were actually playing like a team that was a 10-point favorite and was supposed to take it to Buffalo. As center Pete Brock said on Grogan calling the plays, even going as far as asking the players for suggestions in the huddle, and the great execution of the offense in the second half, it just felt good. It was like the Sandlots. You're the bottle cap, and he wants you to hook it by the ford. Remember, in the first half of the contest, New England only had 56 yards prior to the final play where the Bills were in prevent defense. In the second half, it was like a completely new team out there. Because in the second half, the Patriots had a whopping 287 yards of offense. They were moving the ball on Buffalo at will. They never went 3 and out. And this was an offense that was struggling heavily all season. In their most recent home game before this one, a 35-20 loss to the Los Angeles Raiders, they got shut out in the second half, allowed 2 defensive touchdowns, and only mustered up 287 yards of offense the entire game. And here they were, thanks to Grogan calling all the shots, picking that up in just one half of football. After turning the ball over 4 times in the first half, they played a clean game in the second half, and didn't turn it over once. And even though the scoreboard might not necessarily indicate it, the Patriots got the job done and played a great offensive half of football, and rallied to win the game 14-3. After the game, Coach Berry said that he knew this gutsy strategy was the right thing to do and to try, saying, "We had our best chance of winning by letting him call the plays." I'm sure the plays he called were substantially different from the ones that would have been called for Eason. Our best chance to move the ball was to let him call the game. And man, did that strategy work, and then some. It saved the game, and it saved their season, which was slipping away from them. When the starting quarterback goes down, it usually means that you have to adjust your game plan in some way, shape, or form. But you never see the game plan adjusted in this manner. Today, when people talk about the 1985 Patriots, they talk about a team that somehow made it to their first Super Bowl in franchise history by making it all the way to Super Bowl 20. And they talk about a good team that went on an improbable playoff run of sorts, pulling off back-to-back stunning upsets against the Raiders in the divisional round and the Dolphins in the AFC Championship that no one saw coming. And this is not the first time I've talked about the 1985 Patriots on my channel before, as you can learn more about their success that season by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But the fact that they were even in a position to do that in the first place? Well, that was all because of that incredibly underrated, yet incredibly brilliant coaching move on the part of Raymond Berry. Because when you consider the circumstances, consider how crazy this move seemed on paper, and consider how it worked out in the end, this has to be the greatest halftime adjustment in the over 60-year history of the Patriots franchise. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.